And some of what I was hoping to share on here had a lot to do with lineage and genealogies and me figuring out where mine came from. And it seemed to go right along with what we've recently celebrated now, which is now past, but St. Patrick's Day. So, just so you all know, my deepest roots, or the ones that are most blaringly in my face, is all northern, either Irish, Iberian Peninsula, Eastern Europe, some French in there, maybe about 6%. I do actually have relatives in Belgium. And all that to say, I have been a little obsessed in the last few years with learning more and have grown to identify more with my, I'd say, northern roots and Irish in particular heritage. And some of that was, just say that passion was renewed as I came along, some new information. And I'm going to share some of that in this video. And maybe some of you watching, it won't be that new to you, but I'm guessing at least some of you, it might be. So for those of you who are like, I came from down south, or I, have like all English roots, I don't know. Like maybe this video won't speak to you as much, I'm sorry. But I still believe that we are all connected. Not terribly far back in our lineage. So we could consider ourselves brothers and sisters, even if we come from different parts of the earth. Let me say that. All right, so I'm going to try to make this concise, and forgive me if I ramble on a bit because I still need some practice in that area. But part of the reason that I felt led to create this video is I had a dream, and I know, yes, I had a dream about sharing some of this information, and it was such a vivid dream. I actually woke up from a dream that was all about a place that I was at with some of my extended family, celebrating Irish people and where they came from, and like the Celtic and whatnot heritage. Viking. I mean, it used to be that I identified more with at least a significant part of my lineage being Irish, and the Celtics and the Anglo-Saxons were all kind of associated with the more ancient history. But some of what I want to share is a little more ancient than that. All right, but trying to stay on task, I'm not going to go into detail about my dream. But it went from waking up, from being at this, it almost seemed like a mix of being at a museum / amusement park to being in an Irish restaurant, pub, whatever you want to call it. And during the middle of it, actually getting up and talking about some of this history to a room full of people, which is kind of crazy because I'm like, that's not going to happen. Like, I haven't even gone anywhere remotely like that. And we celebrated at home, or at my dad's house, and we ate some corned beef and made some carrots and cabbage and made some shamrock shakes from scratch. All that being said, I didn't go anywhere. I wasn't in any remote position where this dream could have come true, but part of it I know stemmed off the fact that this was heavily on my mind because of some of the things I've been hearing and studying, but also it made me think, maybe there's something to this. And maybe it's something I should try sharing. Anyways, I don't want this to be long, trying to keep concise. So it's very interesting. We just celebrated St. Patrick's Day, and I've done a little study into his story, and there's all kinds of videos you can get into on that. So I'm not going to talk a lot about St. Patrick, except to say that I find his story very inspiring and compelling, because I do not think he was I think the idea that we have, like, oh, he was a saint, he belonged to the Catholic Church. And keep in mind, this was the Roman Catholic Church that existed in like 400 BC, not AD, excuse me, after Christ came, obviously, because that's what he preached to the island of Ireland. Or, it's not really, whether you decide it's an island or something else. Anyway, point is, he, if you read, if you look into his story, he's clearly was commissioned by God, the real God, to go to this land that was steeped heavily in paganism and worship of other gods. They're druids, they're priests, who may have had some connection anciently and historically to even the God of Israel, had become so distant and so lost and really so evil. They were wrapped up in human sacrifice and all kinds of abominable practices that we're not going to go into in this video, but really no one, at least definitely not me, would want to ever be associated with. And this might sound strange to some people who haven't, if you're not like me. I tend to be, I don't know if it goes along with the O negative blood type or that kind of heritage, but everything that I have in the past, like decades ago even, found to show up or be correlated with my ancestry tends to be on kind of the sketchy side. You get into like the Nephilim and to ancient pagan practices and and even, witchery and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it only seemed to confirm what part of me already knew, that there was a lot of darkness in my genetic past. I don't think that everyone is as in tune to what is in their blood, if you will, or what is, in their part of their ancestry, part of their DNA, in their family history. But I used to joke that I wrestled with my fair share of demons because they were definitely part of my family history. And there's some craziness back there. So, my greatest identity being that of like the ancient northern Celtic tribes and German tribes that came out of that. And there's incomplete at best histories of that kind of lineage. So anyways, all that to say, I have been very interested in learning more about my history, but only fairly recently have I grown to actually love my roots and been glad to be associated with some of my, I say, northern roots. And there are some, there's some good characteristics that go along with that. There tends to be this strain of desire to be free and independent and not enslaved to anyone that actually can be a helpful trait if you look historically back into, say, the Irish heritage. Yes, they're known for being fighters, they're known for having a feisty temper, and that is something I can definitely relate to, although a lot of my close friends wouldn't think it. I'm actually highly empathetic. And I was never the one to want to go and start fights of any kind, but I would have had no problem finishing them if I were standing up for someone I cared about and loved. Like, I definitely have that feistiness in me. And also the idea of never wanting to be in bondage. Like, I would pursue, and I feel like this is part of that kind of lineage, I would pursue a difficult, harder, non-comfortable life versus a one that feels like it's in bondage. Just saying. Freedom loving, truth seeking, like I can totally relate to those. Anyhow, so I'm just gonna go into this biblical piece of prophecy and a story that I have heard over and over again, but there was a morning that God just seemed to have it jump out at me. And it was out of the blue, and I'm like, I just need to do a little more Bible study. And I was looking at one of the last passages that we're reading through, kind of as part of just a biblical portion that we were reviewing at that time. And it was all about the story, strange story it is, you may remember, of Joseph. Now, right around that time when Joseph went into Egypt, but the story is about his brother Judah and how his progeny came to be. It's not one of those stories that I would readily and often tell my children because it's a little bit strange, and yet it's extremely significant because it is a story of how one of the most important tribes of Israel, or sons of Jacob, perpetuated his line and his seed. So if you remember the story, and I'm going to try to go off memory here for conciseness sake, but so Judah goes down into Canaan. He marries this Canaanite woman, and he has 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Many of you are familiar with this story. And he finds a wife for his oldest named Tamar. It doesn't say where Tamar comes from, but it's interesting the fact that he finds this girl for his sons. She likely may not have been a Canaanite, but yet he married a Canaanite woman. So it doesn't define her lineage, but there is this ancient tradition where if a brother dies, the next in line will marry the wife of the deceased, and they have their firstborn son named after him so that their lineage can not be broken, so that they actually have a name for themselves in Israel. Well, dies because he's wicked and God slays him. Onan decides he doesn't want to give offspring to his brother and spills it on the ground. And what he does displeases God, and he kills him also. Well, Judah doesn't seem very eager to give his last-born son to Tamar, kind of worrying that he might die too, probably. So he tells her, go wait in your father's house, I believe, until Shelah, my other son, is grown. And in the time of thing, anyway, she sees that Shelah is grown. She's not been given to him. And her father-in-law is going down to, another part. He's going down to a different area where he's herding his sheep. And she takes off her widow's garments and she dresses up like a harlot and goes down there. Anyways, you can read the story in full in the Bible, but short story, in summary, he goes into her and she becomes pregnant by him, and later on they find out, it's like 3-4 months later, and say, your daughter-in-law has become pregnant by harlotry, and he's like, bring her out to be burned, until he finds out that it's by the one whom he loaned his staff and his signet ring and some very important items too. So it proves that he is definitely the father of this child. But anyway, it turns out to be 2 children. The very interesting part about this story is that there are twins in her womb, and these twins have a very interesting and unique story of their appearance. First off, the midwife who is there sees one put out his hand and wraps a red thread around it, and the baby ends up pulling his hand back, and then his brother actually ends up coming out first all the way. And she says, first, well, this one came out first, and to the other one, what a breach you made for yourself. In fact, they even named him Perez, which means breach. And the other one, which comes out, they named Zarah. I think Zarah actually means rising. It had the idea of rising kind of like the sun early in the morning. Anyways, so what's very interesting about this story is it shows later on about 3 generations of Zarah's line, but it never shows more than that. And it would appear that somewhere during the time when Jacob took his children down into Egypt, before the captivity and before the deliverance out of slavery and their wilderness journey, somewhere during that time, Zarah departed. And you can only come up with, imagine the reasons. So I found an interesting story or video on YouTube that was talking about this. And then there were some other interesting things. And there may have been more than one website, but some of this, I know there's it's called Hope of Israel Ministries, and they have a lot of very interesting works and, information and papers and lineage information about Zarah's line, along with several others in biblical history. And this whole line is believed to have gone up into the northern area, out of, obviously, Egypt, the top part of Egypt, and seem to have traveled up into the north, which is what we would call nowadays the, island of Ireland. And so it completely blew my mind, because never have I would have ever associated any part of myself with the line of Judah, least of all Israelites, because one thing I did know is that I have literally 0 Jewish in me, even though I'm raising my kids according to what I'd call the whole Bible. And I've had several people say, "Are you Jewish?" I'm like, actually, no, not even a teeny bit, not even a little tiny sliver that I can detect at all Jewish. And yet, yes, we are attempting to remember the feast days and keep Passover like literally this next week. And there's a discrepancy of, whether it should be the end of March or the end of April this year. Long story, not going into that. But especially during this time where I'm trying to, celebrate Passover with my family, and I'm learning all this about my lineage, and I realize not everybody cares about this stuff, but I really do. I have for a long time cared about where I came from. I want to know who I am. I want to know where these inklings, these ideas, like why I do what I do, where it comes from, and where I come from. And there's bits and pieces that just jump out at me. I'm like, yes, I can totally relate to that. Yes, that's completely me. Yes, that is, I can completely confirm that there are a lot of little things and larger things that make it seem blazingly obvious that I'm from the north and probably from Ireland and definitely from these Northern Isles, and that my great-grandparents probably came to the Americas during the 1850s or later. I have not been able to piece together past maybe 3 generations very well, especially on the Davis side, that's the Irish side. So anyways, I don't know, this idea just was amazing. Like, I was flabbergasted. And I felt like I just had something like a precious gift offered to me. Like, you may be more connected to not just Israel, but even the tribe of Judah than you think. And this whole idea that a tribe like the one I came from, that seemed obscured in paganism and idolatry and all kinds of crazy practices and witchery and worship of nature. And, some of that I feel like I can relate to. For me, the idea that God is creator is one of the chief principles about his character and who he is and what defines him. It's like, if I wasn't raised on the Bible, which I was, and I believe and ascribe to these, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that is my God. Even if I was outside the lineage or blood heritage, why even care about that if my lineage is so far out? Anyways, I could do a whole nother episode on how I think blood actually really does affect what you think, what you feel, and how you act. But we're not going to go into that in this video. But to bring it back in, looking farther back than some of that, you could call it forgetting and leading into all this paganism, if you will, and witchcraft and idol worship and nature worship, etc., etc. After I watched some of those videos that I watched that day, I found other videos that actually have said, and maybe if I find those, I'm still on a journey, okay? Still on a journey to verify some of these things that I've been studying and looking into that seem highly likely. But there's a difference between conjecture and what may likely have happened and what can actually be proved. So anyways, still in this journey of studying, because genetics to me is amazing and I would love to study that more for so many reasons. And genealogies are very interesting, I think profound. But all that said, thinking and realizing that could even be a possibility. Oh, and the other videos I found, sorry, I got off on a tangent. I'm so sorry. I do this all the time. I'm like, this connects to all these. No, bring it back. There are other videos out there that show and other proof that the most ancient genetics that they can find in Ireland seem to be of Hebrew origin. In fact, if you look at some of their early history, when the great kings of Ireland were a thing, and now there are so many myths about it, but I think in reality, there are very many beautiful things you can find and very many similar things to Hebrew or Israeli culture. And I also find it interesting that the kings, these great kings of old, had to be subject to the law, which is an extremely Israeli concept. That doesn't just happen in the pagan cultures. That came from somewhere. That came from the Bible, and that came from Israel. The law being the basis for how they lived life, not just the king doing whatever he wanted. So there's all these little things that you can find that seem to affirm these ideas. And I find them fascinating. Okay, another thing, there's been a lot of research by, what's his name? His name is Nathaniel T. Jensen, and he has been doing some work for Amateurs in Genesis, and he wrote this large book called Traced, DNA's Big Surprise. And I've watched several videos of his. Some of them are a little repetitive. And he makes some good points, and he talks about specific races and their likelihoods of where they came from historically. He does that a lot with ancient Egypt cultures and how it looks like a lot of our most ancient DNA comes from ancient northern Egypt, which isn't surprising. Anyways, but one of the most profound things that he does with not just genetics, but with the mathematics behind how certain things have to play out with the Y chromosomes and his mitochondrial DNA from the female side and the Y chromosomes from the male side. And he talks about the time periods, and I'm not going to go into all that he talked about, But he kind of proves this idea that most of us have, like it's been scientifically proven by genetics now, that DNA only goes back so many thousands of years. And it aligns actually perfectly the Y chromosomes on the male side with going all the way back to Noah. Now, on the female side, because, you know, those 3 wives of his 3 sons actually have a timetable that goes back a bit farther, which points more to Eve and Adam and Eve. Anyway, but that said, what he really does is a good job of showing how interconnected we all are, and that even in a few short generations, you can go from black to white, from white to black, maybe not as quickly. And, you know, these looks of these peoples, like you can only really go back 3, maybe 4 generations before, it's very hard to tell where you came from by how you look. So there are, you know, people who identify as Jews that are light-skinned and red-haired, and some that are dark and look more like Arabs, which I am married to a half Arabic man and learned a little bit about how they have done a better job of holding on to their more recent traditional history, and even genetically they are more the same because they tend to stay within that Arabic family gene pool. They'll even marry cousins and whatnot. So theirs is much easier to trace back, at least several generations. And their skin tone and hair color and eye color are a lot more similar than families that came, say, from the north and intermarried, came down to the south. Anyway, I don't want to go into all that for terribly long. Sorry, I feel like I'm shaking my camera a bit, and that's annoying. So anyway, this year, while celebrating the story of St. Patrick, which in times past I've always done with a little bit of pride because I know I have Irish in my heritage. It's one of those that are more easily traced just within a couple generations. We had family that came over from Ireland, like, you know, it's one of those pieces that exists that we know about. And the story that I was pondering was just how God took this man and really did do a work of converting him himself and put it in his heart and called him through in all kinds of ways, through dreams, through impressing it on his heart, to go back to Ireland and seem to give him, in miraculous ways, the words to speak and ways to reach out to those people that spoke profoundly to their past and put together the pieces for them of where they truly came from. And the God, not these many gods that you're serving, but how there really is truly one God. And it related enough of their near past with their ancient past to where those who had ears to hear, at least, began to be converted and realize who they were and who their God was. And he turned away a great amount of paganism and degradation, whatever word you want to come from that nation kind of as a whole, which was headed down a very dark, slippery path of great and deep forgetting of who they were. And it only takes a generation or two to forget some of the most profound things, just like the Pharaoh that forgot Joseph, like one of the most prominent figures, really, in their very near history that saved both Egypt and all the rest of the world from famine. And how did he forget about Joseph, I think they had to have deliberately done that. I mean, perhaps it was the pride of Egypt. And yeah, and the inviting back of other gods and forgetting like the true God and the people that he ordained to be a light at that season. Kind of reminds you of what's happening now, doesn't it? Anyways, so just a profoundly beautiful story. And if you are like me and you know that you have some of this northern Celtic, Irish, maybe Scottish, Eastern European, North Iberian Peninsula, like heritage, and come from that area, the fact that God did such an amazing work to bring back his people, and look at what happened to Ireland afterwards, or people who were there. They developed, yes, all these monasteries, and they became, Christianity swept through a great part of that nation to where still it's the main religion of people who are Irish. We even have some around us who are from that same, who have been impacted with the same religion. Anyways, that's a story and idea and video for a whole nother day, talking about the growth and the progression and the downfall and degradation, really, of the whole Catholic Church itself. Very interesting entity. But apart from that, this was not a work done by any church. This was a work done by God through a man who was sent there to preach the real gospel of the living God to these people. And because of that, not only are there so many of us around today who are learning ever more and more about the God, the real God of Israel, but I find it interesting how in these monasteries that were created and during their history that followed that time period, and even throughout the Middle Ages, they became one of the most prominent people, also as the Jews, for preserving God's word and the Bible. A gift, a commission that was particularly granted to, and a charge given to the Jewish people. One of their main jobs was to keep and preserve his word for all the nations throughout time. And they were a large part of that. And I just think how interesting that they're fulfilling a lot of these mandates. And I'm not going to go into all the different areas, like Jacob gave this blessing to Judah specifically about the scepter never departing from him until the time of peace and Messiah literally coming back will come. And you can see this throughout history, even with the reign of the ancient Irish kings, to what many believe later became the British monarchy and some other, I should probably have read through some of those, and several others, like what ended up becoming this white supremacy, which I think is a very specific reason why people are coming down, why it's the accepted thing to be against white, especially males, and the people who literally founded America and Christianized it and made it prosperous and beautiful. And there's a whole history of that I've been studying too, that the decline of the Americas, which was once actually quite vibrant and beautiful, during somewhere between, it seemed to end around the 1200s, if you will, to like 1300s. And by the time Columbus arrived here on these shores, the population had died out significantly, and it had nothing to do with white men coming here and taking land away from the natives. In fact, I mean, there's good and bad of every people, of every lineage throughout all time, but there were more people who engaged in actually witnessing to these Native American peoples, the ones that were left and still here, than, I don't know, than was happening, well, like anywhere else. That all said, that's kind of another trail we could go down, but it's just interesting, especially if you look at the peoples and the nations and these images that tend to be oppressed, and it seems like the enemy wants to do away with them, maybe even demonize them, get rid of them. Even the things I found out about my own lineage seemed demonized because there was so much darkness connected to it. And yet, who would have ever thought that such a race that we think of as being wild and paganistic and, full of war and violence is actually anciently those who were there to begin with, in fact, they even called the land Hibernia to begin with, were actually part of an Israeli race that was filled with promises that they ended up keeping. And they played an important role in bringing the gospel to the nations and even in preserving the word of God. Such a beautiful thing. Anyways, you can look up, and I wish I would have put this down. I didn't write down the places. I'm sorry. Maybe I can put them in later. But I think it's somewhere in 2 Kings and Chronicles. They have this genealogy of Zarah. In fact, they call it Zarah. There's Zarah of the Red Hand. And they have shown throughout history that there actually are these emblems that the nation of Ireland held onto for generations, that had a rampant red lion, which is related to Judah. Judah was the lion tribe. And many of them have this red hand, and many have a red hand with a hand with a red thread tied around it. In fact, there was one I found just the other day, about 4 generations back in my family, that seems highly likely that there may be one of those shields actually in my family tree. It's like, but I'm not sure because, it's hard to verify for sure. It just seems likely. Anyway, maybe I will find out more specifically some of the stuff. And I have a feeling with where we're going that pretty soon people will have a much more sure and, verifiable way of seeing exactly where their DNA points. And I think they might be surprised. And I think that one of the things that might surprise us is how many children, like true blood children, there are actually of Abraham. Maybe not even just of Abraham, but of one of the 12 tribes of Jacob. And I believe that what we're seeing right now in history, in so many ways, are those tribes that God is taking from all over the world and bringing them back and uniting them once again. This idea that the people of Ireland, of all things, could be the long-lost brother of Judah, and to see them come back into fellowship, Judah, our brother. And I believe that even if you don't see, Judah or Israel as like your particular blood lineage, they are our brother. This is whom our Messiah came through, and this is who we are literally blood joined through. As Yeshua said, unless you drink my blood and eat my flesh, you don't have any life in you. We are connected through blood. I would love to do a whole nother video on blood because I find it extremely significant. But this just fascinates me so much to think about. And think about, it's not just an idea. It is a literal, spiritual, and physical reality that these tribes, that these nations are realizing their true identity, coming back to the one true God and being joined with his nation, Israel. I don't know if I should go out on a limb and say this, but I believe soon, somewhere, in the end, there will be just Israel. Everyone joining into Israel, while they're grafted in or realizing that you were originally part of it to begin with, and you've gone out into the nations. There will be Israel, and there will be all the other nations that oppose her. There has never been a time in history that has been more necessary to join to and support Israel than right now. It's amazing what we are seeing happen in our nation today. In our nation, in our world today. Our nation's going crazy. But despite that, there's something beautiful happening right now. He is creating, he is finishing his promises. He created the nation of Israel. He's sustaining them. He's saving them. He's helping them. You can go on YouTube and look at Stories to Inspire. It's every day they have another story of how God miraculously allowed someone to go in and save a bunch of hostages, or they were saved from certain death because of something miraculous that happened. Even the fact that they are able to make it as a nation, financially, economically, what's happening over there agriculturally, it's all a miracle. It's amazing. So, finishing up, that's what I was talking about. I just wanted to name. So, there are 5 sons of Zarah that are recorded in the Bible. And one of them, I just wrote them down. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing them wrong. Who knows anymore? But there's Zimri, or Zimri. And his name means my music. So think about some of the still famous music that comes from the north and comes from Celtic, from Ireland, from these northern places. And I just thought, this is one son that was known for his music. And this is what his name was. There's Ethan, or Ethan, however you want to say it, which means enduring. And he has a son named Azariah, which literally means Yahovah, or God has helped. And what a beautiful picture of so Ethan is his tribe, his name, think of it, enduring through all these years, thousands of years. One was Heman, who is what is interpreted the faithful. And think about how that relates, I just think how that correlates and relates to how they remained faithful in many ways and faithfully preserved his word way later. I don't know. I think that's beautiful. One was Kalkol, which means sustaining. Another beautiful, powerful name. Also, this was one of the men who was called a wise man, one of the wise men that Solomon himself was compared to. He surpassed even the wisdom of Kalkol. And the 5th one is Dara. And Dara means the arm. And if you know a little bit about Hebrew language or emblems, the yod is the arm, and it's a symbol of power and strength. Yeshua is God's right hand, literally his strength, coming down, doing things in the world. And I don't know, it makes me think also of, maybe even the arm and the hand that ends up being on their emblems so much later. Anyways, so if I can wrap this up with a bit of a summary, I find it beautiful and empowering and amazing. And all glory to the Most High God, who is doing this in our day and revealing things that were forgotten before. Whoever you are, God is bringing remembrance and identity to his people in amazing ways. And I think no matter who you are, you'll find one somewhere. You will find that in truth, you have an identity that is more rooted and grounded in actual biblical realities and histories than maybe we ever thought before. And I was thinking of that verse because it's possible, perhaps, that my lineage, or at least a part of them, because we have, who knows where we all came from and intermarried with, but at least a part of my people may have never gone into slavery or came out or had that experience. Maybe that's possible. And yet, he says, there will be a day when they no longer say, the one who brought you up out of Egypt and out of the house of bondage, which he did. But they will say, the one who brought them from the north and the south and the east and the west and from all the parts, all over the world. And yes, and I should have a reference for that. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with references. I remember the verses. Maybe I can put it up on the screen later. But I will bring you from all over the world, the one who brought them back from all the nations where they were driven, and then brought them into their promised land and fulfilled his promises to them. This is the age we're living in, and there's huge significance to it. I don't know if I succeeded in maybe giving you a little piece of hope or helped you learn something new maybe about your own heritage, but maybe it can just be a little part of you finding your own heritage and why, and the part that you're supposed to play right now in this time of history. Anyways, I'll just leave it with that. Until next time, I will say goodbye, shalom, and we'll see you in a future video, Yah willing.